There is $1 million up for grabs on a 2-game slate. The Saturday playoffs are kicking off, and you're going to be as prepared as possible because you're here. And we're going to start, not now with the quarterbacks, but right now. I appreciate all you ladies and fellas and all the gentlemen out there today. Hey, welcome into the channel. We're going to break this down by telling you exactly where you want to prioritize your lineups this week to try and win $1 million on Saturday. And then we're going to be right back here on Sunday and Monday Night Football slate, so be sure to come back. But let's get started with the quarterback position, where we actually have some expensive quarterbacks for a 2-game slate. We haven't really seen this on some of these 2-game slates lately, and you're going to get Josh Allen on here, who lately the rushing numbers for Josh Allen have been looking phenomenal. I mean, last time out against New England, he drops 34 points, so I'm not too worried about Bill Belichick being able to neutralize and take away Josh Allen. When the man has a rocket arm and can fit it into any space that he wants, it's really difficult to make your defenders 2 times as fast. Josh Allen has 60 or more rushing yards in 4 of his last 5 games, and Jared Smola was nice enough to tweet out that you can see the splits here for Josh Allen. Insanely higher rushing production when it gets colder, when it's in the postseason, and oh yeah, the game's supposed to be 0 degrees with negative weather with the wind chill for this game in Buffalo. And then you compare his rushing upside to anybody else on the slate at the quarterback position, and the rest of these guys, like Joe Burrow slightly, but not really, especially after the injury last year. There's nobody else like Josh Allen on this slate. So I say, okay, what do my projections look like? And I have Josh Allen projecting out as the highest projected quarterback, but he's the 3rd highest owned because of his price tag. So people are very price sensitive to Josh Allen, and I understand that. He's $7,900 on a 2-game slate. But because of that, we're getting very low ownership on Josh Allen. I have Josh Allen on a 2-game slate coming in less than 30% owned on this slate. And again, I have Joe Burrow and Derek Carr coming in higher owned than him. Now, Joe Burrow, there's nothing wrong with it. If you get the elite Joe Burrow the last 2 weeks, there's a big question to ask yourselves here, because it is, does this continue? They had to get into a shootout against Kansas City. There was no choice. It was going back and forth. Against Baltimore, they even said after the game, Jamar chased Joe Burrow like it was personal, right? Baltimore ran up the score on them last year. It was personal. They were saying some shit before the game. And over those 2 games, Joe Burrow throws 95 times. He has 8 touchdowns, no interceptions, completes 70% of his passes. He looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. You ask yourself now, does it continue? The team total says that it continues in terms of offensive production against a Raiders team that goes a lot of single highs, a 27.75 team total, a 6-point favorite. They are the biggest favorites with the biggest total for a team on the slate, and you get a slight price discount off of Josh Allen. That's why there's higher ownership going there. I still have Josh Allen projected out higher. If you can find the extra $600, I prefer Josh Allen over Joe Burrow, but Burrow is in play. And then for me, that's it. I don't want to own Derek Carr, who is currently coming in with the highest ownership on the slate, around 30 to 35%. I understand that Derek Carr is cheaper on the slate at $5,800. They have a 22-team implied total. He is an underdog of 6 points, so more pass attempts. But even in an overtime game that goes down to the wire, Derek Carr fails to break 200 yards passing. He has his first multi-touchdown passing game since week 9 earlier in the season. The upside, he has Darren Waller back, sure, now, and they really weren't connecting together in a game where, you didn't have Waller for a month, but it's not something that I find the upside for. Does Derek Carr maybe get me to 17 points? Maybe when Josh Allen and Joe Burrow have the ability to hit 30, especially Josh Allen because of the mobile upside that he brings to the table. So for me personally, I'm not touching Derek Carr, and that's just how I'm going. I know a lot of people are going to go there because then you can afford Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs, or you can afford all these expensive players. I understand that. I'm going to try and make it work with Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, because what their floors and ceiling combinations are, like the floors of those guys, their median projections are potentially the ceiling of Derek Carr this week. It also doesn't help that Derek Carr will be facing, and he doesn't already have big play upside in this offense. It's gone since Ruggs was gone. Waller being back will help, but it doesn't help that he's going to be facing a team that has been very solid in terms of playing cover 2s. I'm just personally not interested in Mac Jones. You can get to him if you want to, if you really want to. If I'm going to hover in the $5,000 range, I'd rather go to the guy in Derek Carr who will throw 35 times rather than Mac Jones, who's more likely to throw 25 to 30 times. I have Mac Jones being in the optimal lineup only 8% of the time this week, coming in with currently 12% ownership, so it's just not really anything left on the bone there. Now with that, let's transition to the running back position, where it's a little bit more nuanced, and you're really going to start to get nuance at the wide receiver and tight end position, so be sure to stick around for those. So the running back position is going to be an interesting one, and we'll go through and we'll put our interests in here based on salary order. Up top, you're going to have Joe Mixon, who's seen an elite 75% target share throughout the 2021 season. He ended his season with 14 targets on 53 routes in those 2 massive games, those 2 high point totals, high pass attempts, shootout-like environments that Cincinnati was in. And he was seeing those 22 opportunities per game. They unlocked him. He didn't play in week 18 when it didn't really matter. He was top 5 in the NFL this year in routes run per game at the running back position, which was something that we didn't know if we would see coming into this year. Early on, people were concerned about the rookie Chris Evans being out there, Samaje Perine running some routes. And then around midseason, this offense got unlocked a little bit. They started to run less and pass more. Joe Mixon actually benefited from that because a target is worth over 2 times more than a rush attempt in fantasy football for running backs. So Joe Mixon for me is like the only secure play on the slate at the running back position, and now I know what you're saying. You have Josh Allen, you have Joe Mixon, or you have Burrow, and you have Mixon. It starts to become very difficult to build this out. And if you want to just talk lineup construction-wise, yeah, if I'm going to be going into this slate, I'm going to full-on game stack somewhere. So if I have Josh Allen, I'm going to likely have him with 3 of his pass catchers or 3 of the players on his team. It can include a running back. If I have Joe Burrow, I'm likely going to have him with 3 players from his team. Not a lot of people will do that. Not a lot of people will stack the quarterback with a tight end with multiple receivers on this slate. You might think that they will because you're sharp, but they won't. So Joe Mixon up top becomes a very secure play for me. Joe Mixon currently resides as my highest projected running back on the slate, and by a significant amount. Like, we're talking over 4 fantasy points here, a significant amount. This is a guy that I think a lot of people will make a mistake on. I like Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs has looked very good. I put out some tweets about Josh Jacobs. He finished top 5 in receptions this year at the running back position, partially because and really because Kenyon Drake went down midseason. In that last game, they said, we're not giving any touches to Peyton Barber. They said this is a playoff-like environment here against the Chargers. 30 to 35 opportunities did not go to Peyton Barber, did not go to Jalen Richard. That many opportunities, an 86% opportunity share, which is elite. That would have ranked number 2 in the NFL this year, only behind Najee Harris from that last game for Josh Jacobs against the Chargers. But I want to focus on something very specific here, and that is the fact that Josh Jacobs only ran 12 routes in that game to Jalen Richard running 16 routes. Richard came in on more third down opportunities. That was not something that we were seeing for the past 2 months of the season. Richard came back a couple of weeks back from injury in C19, and since that, each of the past 4 weeks, his routes run have increased from 4 to 6 to 10 to this past week having 16 routes run. Now, Josh Jacobs still saw 4 targets in the game, but only on 12 routes run. That is likely not going to sustain. Earlier in the season, Jacobs is running 20 to 24 routes a game. Now, if he's going to be in this camp of just running 10 to 12, that can be a concern for sure. So because of that, I don't think a lot of people are going to pay attention to that. He's a 6-point underdog with a low team total of 21.75. I don't think that many people are going to pay attention to those things. If he's a 6-point underdog and they take him off the field more in third downs and passing situations and Richard's in the game, which this is only a 1 to 3 game sample, so this could be small, but I'm trying to find trends to get an edge here. If that's the case, Josh Jacobs' his actual projection, where many people will have it around 15 or 16, might only be like 12 points, and that's not great at 6,600. That starts to look a lot like Damian Harris, right? Josh Jacobs starts to look a lot like where they both came out of Alabama, his fellow alumni in Damian Harris, who doesn't have much of a passing role, right? Damian Harris has no passing role. Like, at least Josh Jacobs is running routes per game, right? He's running like 15 routes per game. You get Damian Harris running 7 routes per game and seeing 1.1 targets per game this year. We know how Damian Harris gets it done. Damian Harris gets it done by scoring touchdowns, and luckily for him, this man, all he does is score touchdowns. The coffee is making its way into the scene. How about that? But what you get from Damian Harris is 12 plus fantasy points in the last 5 games, even though he's not getting any receptions, because over that last 5 games, he has a couple of multi-touchdowns games. He has 8 touchdowns over his last 5 games. But he hasn't hit 20 opportunities since week 8. You saw him see a little bit more work in week 18, but that was because Ramondre Stevenson basically missed the whole first half, getting his head checked, came back in the second half. That's why his snaps were down. So Damian Harris is also definitely in play because of the fact that he's going to be the goal line back. He's probably going to see 12 to 15 plus opportunities in this game, likely all of them on the ground. So he's going to remain in play. But Jacobs and Damian Harris, honestly, I think that if Damian Harris, where it stands right now, Josh Jacobs is 55% owned, Damian Harris is 25% owned. If they're both going to come in as underdogs with not great team totals, and there's a chance neither of them see all that much pass catching work, why not just take the guy who's half as owned? So if you're choosing between Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris and you're trying to win a GPP, a milli maker up top, I think that's the type of decisions you have to start to think closely about. Half his own Damian Harris, there's not that much difference between these guys, except that Harris is cheaper and less of an underdog. Next up is Devin Singletary, which I think this is probably going to be the most common build. I think people will go to Joe Mixon and then they'll go to Devin Singletary, and it makes a lot of sense. You just have to make sure you're getting different somewhere else. I do think that Devin Singletary is probably overall the best running back play in the slate, not projection-wise, that's Joe Mixon, but when you factor in the price point, Devin Singletary has been the workhorse. He's played 70+% of the snaps now in 5 straight games. Devin Singletary continues to see 20+ attempts in 3 of his last 4 games. He's topped 100 total yards in back-to-back games now, and he has 6 touchdowns over the last 4 games. This is why Cole Beasley's usage is going down in the slot. They're running the ball more. They're putting 2 tight ends on the field more, so you have 12 personnel, no slot receiver, run the ball more, focus on the run more. These teams are playing 2 high safeties against you, and you can't hit the deep passes to Gabe Davis and Steph Diggs as often. So what do? You hand the ball off, and Devin Singletary is benefiting from that, as Matt Breida has been inactive, as Zach Moss has been inactive some weeks, and now he's been getting some touches, not really much, but some touches, as a guy playing 20% of the snaps as a backup. So Devin Singletary projects out as a very solid play this week at his current price tag. I have him right now as basically the best value, if you will, quote-unquote value running back, Mixon the highest projected. I touched on Ramondre Stevenson, only played 14% of the snaps in week 18, but that's because he left in the first half with a head injury, and then he had to come back in. He'll likely get back up to his week 17 role of somewhere around 50% of the snaps. It's going to be a 3-headed backfield here, depending on the game script. I'm not that enticed by Ramondre Stevenson. I'll keep him in play, but at this price point, find a way to get up to Devin Singletary. If I'm going to go down here, I'm going to play his teammate, and that teammate is Brandon Bolden at $4,800. Look, they're underdogs in this game. Brandon Bolden plays when the team is an underdog, and Brandon Bolden, the last time out against this Buffalo team, he ended up going out there. He ran 19 routes in that game, saw 5 targets, and he played 49% of the snaps. If they're trailing in a game like they were against Miami in Week 18, when all the starters played, and Brandon Bolden played 40% of the snaps, Bolden's going to be on the field more. They're underdogs in this one. They trailed against Buffalo last time. They're projected to trail against Buffalo this time. If there is any value running back that you're looking for below $5,000, I think the only one that's in play this week is Brandon Bolden. Samaje Perine played special teams last week. I don't even know why that's the case in a game that didn't matter for them, so I don't think that's going to be in play. Peyton Barber saw no touches last week in a game that actually matters. Chris Evans has been playing, if you don't count last week when all the backups were in for the Bengals, he's been playing like 5% of the snaps. What has it been? It's been 5% of the snaps 4 straight weeks. Not interested. Zach Moss is going to go out there and be the clear RB2. 20% of the snaps in the last 2 games since he's been activated. He's only seen 9 routes in 10 attempts. The only other guy below $5,000 outside of Bolden that might be in play and you can at least talk about is Jalen Richard. He ran 16 routes and saw 2 attempts in an overtime game. He ended up seeing 4 opportunities. His routes have increased in 4 straight games. I think you probably see Richard see 2 to 3 touches in this game. He would have to score a long touchdown on one of them. I'm not going to be there. So running back is pretty straightforward for me. I think it looks Mixon and Singletary as the best options. Damian Harris over Josh Jacobs in GPPs for all the leverage in the world. And then Brandon Bolden, if you're looking for a cheaper play, should play somewhere around 40% of the snaps if indeed they're trailing in this game. Now we get to the positions where a lot of nuance is going to come into play, where wide receivers in the flex are going to look pretty damn interesting. But which ones? Where is the Damian Harris off of Josh Jacobs leverage play at the wide receiver and tight end position? Well, we're about to get to it. First, let us talk about the sponsors of the program. The sponsors of the program are PrizePicks.com, the sponsors of this channel, and it's a player prop site where you just take the over-under on fantasy points, on player props, on rushing yards, and all that stuff. And props are the best way to get involved once your fantasy football regular seasons are over. If that's your main way, this is going to be a beautiful thing for you. You get a free bet up to $100, and they're going to be running a lot of playoff promotions as well in terms of just getting some free props over under a half a passing yard for Josh Allen type stuff will likely start to come out as the week goes on, so be sure to track that. But a free bet up to $100 if you use the code SAL. I took Darren Waller over 10.5 fantasy points and Jacoby Myers over 8.5 fantasy points. Be sure to act on this quick. These will not stand. These are promotions. Darren Waller, I have him for over 15 fantasy points. Jacoby Myers, I have him for around 12 fantasy points. Rarely are these off by 5 like Darren Waller's or 3 or 4 like Jacoby Myers. Take advantage of these. You can combine these two together if you use the code SAL on PrizePicks.com on your first deposit, first-time users. If you already have an account, well, tell your sister, your mother, your brother, your aunt to make an account so you can take advantage of that free bet match up to $100. Code SAL on PrizePicks.com. Go get those props before they change. So now we transition into the wide receiver position here, and the wide receiver position is loaded. It's absolutely loaded. And up top, you're going to get 2 guys you have to decide between. There are 2 guys in the 7K range, 2 guys in the 6K range, and then it quickly becomes a value range of $5,000 and below. Now, how do you decide between these guys? Can you play both of these guys? Well, you're probably going to have to play a cheaper quarterback or avoid Joe Mixon. You can definitely play both of these guys. Jamar Chase and Steph Diggs. I think the field is going to go to Jamar Chase here. Love Jamar Chase this year. I think he's obviously fantastic. I think this decision solely relies on who you choose at quarterback. If you're going to go to Josh Allen, you're going Steph Diggs here. If you're going to go to Joe Burrow, you're going Jamar Chase here. I think that's as simple as it gets. It makes it very easy for you. You increase the correlation, which makes it just a better play, naturally speaking. Kind of takes the decision out of your hands. Now, say you're playing one of the other quarterbacks, so Mac Jones or Derek Carr, you want to go that route, and you just want a one-off here. I think that they're obviously both in play, but the one that I'm going to go towards more is probably Steph Diggs. And this is nothing against Jamar Chase, right? It's nothing against Jamar Chase. But when I'm looking at these 2 teams that have similar team totals that are favorites in Buffalo and Cincinnati, and then I look at how they're probably going to get there, throwing 35 times each. Okay, well then why would I not go to the guy who's going to project out for a 30% target share in this playoff game against New England, who last time out against New England, by the way, had 7 catches on 13 targets, 85 yards and a touchdown on 131 air yards. Steph Diggs now has 100 or more air yards, which just shows you all the upside in the world downfield. In 5 of his last 6 games, he had a massive 14 targets on 42 routes to close out the season, and he's averaging nearly 10 targets per game. So Steph Diggs is averaging 10 targets per game this year, and once you get to the playoffs, you rely on your studs even more, where Jamar Chase is battling with T. Higgins. Jamar Chase is only averaging 7.5 targets per game, only, I say lightly. He's battling Tyler Boyd. He's battling Joe Mixon and a team that still is kind of split on wanting to run the ball. When we know that the targets are going to Steph Diggs, at least we can feel a little bit more reliable about that. And the reason I like this even more is that right now Jamar Chase is coming in at 48% ownership on my ownership projections on Patreon down below. We have an optimizer, we have projections, ways for you to actually take advantage and make yourself a better player. Come join the community, a Discord of like-minded members, a great community to being fostered there. But I'll prefer Steph Diggs right now over Ja'Marr Chase because of all those things I just said. I think you're going to get naturally higher volume here, less competition, and right now Steph Diggs is about 10% lesser owned than Ja'Marr Chase. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the $6,000 range. I think this is a clear-cut answer if you're looking for one player in the 6K range. Again, you can combine these players if you want to. I think that T. Higgins is by far and away a better play than Hunter Renfrow. Renfrow has been great this year. He continues to just have like 13-plus points a game, right? The last 3 games, he's had 13-plus points, even though he's not seeing a lot of targets because he scored 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He is a elite target share guy in the red zone. 24 targets on the year is elite. That is number 6 in the NFL. And Hunter Renfrow matches up well against this team in Cincinnati, who will often go with 2 high safeties, a Awuzie back there, and it leaves it so that this Raiders team with Darren Waller and Renfrow can take advantage on these shorter routes. My concern is that Hunter Renfrow's routes have been going down each of the last 3 weeks when they want to run the ball more. With Darren Waller back, they can now more feasibly run more 2 tight end sets if they're in a neutral game script or even playing from ahead in this game. They don't put Hunter Renfrow on the outside all that often, maybe sometimes in the red zone, but on the outside it has been pretty consistently Bryan Edwards and Zay Jones. So now if you have Darren Waller back, and we saw this in that last game of Hunter Renfrow only playing like 60% of the snaps instead of his normal role of 85% of the snaps, that starts to become a trend that I want to watch closely. He is now below 65% of the snaps in 3 straight games, and I don't think people will react to that as much, so I'm going to keep him, of course, in play on this 2-game slate, but Higgins is by far and away the better option. I think Higgins is the best wide receiver play in the slate. I also think, though, because of that, he'll probably come in as the highest owned wide receiver play in the slate. You're getting a $1,600 discount off of Ja'Marr Chase, even though Higgins has a higher target share and more targets per game this year than Ja'Marr Chase. And when he gets those one-on-one single coverage matchups, because the Raiders historically just love to play, and historically the last couple of years, right, with his defense, they love to play 1 high safeties. I mean, that's why the Chiefs torched them twice, right? 1 high safeties means more man-to-man matchups, one-on-one matchups. And those matchups are going to bode well for a dude who's 220 pounds like T. Higgins, especially when you factor in that he's cheaper. He's going to come in with similar ownership to Ja'Marr Chase, right? People are going to stack that team up. I doubt rarely they'll triple stack the receivers, which could be an interesting way to build. But yes, T. Higgins to me looks like a solid play, looks like probably the best overall play on the slate. Adding in the nuance of at the wide receiver position there. Next up, we can scroll here, and you're going to get Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers just looks like a fine play. He's $5,000. He continues to see targets. 8+ targets in 4 straight games, very quietly. If you take out the win game in Buffalo, it's 5 straight games for him. He now has 6 red zone targets over the last 4 games, has a 24% target share and 7.4 targets per game this year. That 24% target share and 7.4 targets per game is basically the exact same as Ja'Marr Chase. Obviously, Chase's targets are more downfield. They're more dynamic. They're connected to Joe Burrow, who has been a much better quarterback than Mac Jones this year. But if you're just talking about volume for the price point, yeah, this looks good. You have to identify that those targets are going much less far downfield, though, for Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers is very much in play. I think Jakobi Meyers, by the time Saturday's live stream comes, will probably be a leverage play that I'm on much more. Tyler Boyd is the most interesting play on the slate for me. He is the most interesting play on the slate because I think Tyler Boyd comes in at very high ownership. I currently have Tyler Boyd coming in around the 3rd highest owned receiver. These 3 Cincinnati Bengals are going to be massively owned, which again kind of leads me to say, hey, how can we get this Buffalo stack going? But Tyler Boyd is a fine play. He has a touchdown in each of his last 3 games, but that's mainly why he's getting it done. It's a very interesting conundrum this week. Touchdown in 3 straight games, but he's only seeing 5.9 targets per game. He has not topped 6 targets in a game in the last 5 weeks. He had a massive game 2 weeks back in week 16, if you don't count week 18 when none of them played, but that was because he had only a couple of catches and one of them went for like a 60-yard touchdown on a blown coverage. He was just wide open. So he's at a strong price point. The matchup for him does not bode as well, right? You're looking at one-on-one matchups on the outside. I just mentioned it. T. Higgins, Ja'Marr Chase, at times you're going to have one-on-one matchups on the outside. Rarely, a single high safety kind of means at the middle of the field, the run game, the tight end, the slot receiver don't have as much juice against that type of a defense. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, matchup-wise, scheme-wise, Tyler Boyd doesn't make as much sense, but he keeps scoring these damn touchdowns. He's so damn cheap. He's attached to the best team total. He projects out so good for me right now. He's my second value receiver behind T. Higgins on the slate, but I do think there's ways that Tyler Boyd can fail. I mean, if I look at it right now, I'd rather go, I think, in a GPP, and I think that this is the leverage play we were talking about, how we said you go off of Josh Jacobs to Damian Harris. I think you can go off of Tyler Boyd to Jakobi Meyers here, or even off of Tyler Boyd to Kendrick Bourne, but Jakobi Meyers is averaging 7.4 targets per game. You have Tyler Boyd not even averaging 6 targets per game. They're both seeing red zone usage in their offense. It's just that Tyler Boyd is coming off of a 3-touchdown streak, right? And he also has a much higher team total. I get all that. So Tyler Boyd is in play, but I think if you're looking for a way to get different, if you already have a lineup that has a lot of ownership in it, I think that going from Tyler Boyd to Jakobi Meyers, I think that Meyers likely comes in with 15% less ownership, which matters on a 2-game slate. And in general, these Patriots guys are just going to give you leverage in some spots. Like Mac Jones isn't leverage. I don't think that's leverage. Leverage means that they actually have a chance to be in the optimal lineup. I think that Damian Harris is leverage. I think that Brandon Bolden is slightly leverage. I think that Jakobi Meyers is leverage. I'm not as high on Kendrick Bourne because he's a slot receiver for a team that wants to play 2 tight ends, and you just saw Nelson Agholor come back in week 18 and play his season high in snaps at 93%. So I'm not as much there on a Kendrick Bourne, I would say. Emanuel Sanders is an interesting name to at least monitor. These secondary Bills receivers are the reason why I made the Bills come in low on, because nobody knows what to do with them. Emanuel Sanders got in a full practice. He looks like he's going to play, but we don't know what his role is actually going to be. He has not topped 10 fantasy points since week 9, but if he was to return, Gabe Davis has played the last 4 games, right? But there was this one game in there when Emanuel Sanders came back in week 16 and played 79% of the snaps. But Gabe Davis wasn't available that game. He was out with C19. And since then, Davis is operating and getting a lot of targets coming off of a 13-target game, so we don't really know what's going to happen here. We know Steph Diggs is going to be a starter. We know when they're actually out there with 3 wide receivers that Cole Beasley is going to be in the slot. But the biggest question on this slate in terms of what does the personnel look like is going to be, do they stick with Gabe Davis, who has, honestly, he's not been that productive for them. He is not great at separating. This would be a tough matchup for him, but he's been out there and he's been running the younger player, or do they go to Emanuel Sanders, the older player who's been dealing with injuries and hasn't been productive since the midway point of the year? I think that is going to be the most important news. If you hit right and it's Emanuel Sanders running 80% of the snaps and seeing 7 targets against New England where he actually saw some volume last time out, that starts to become in play. So I think that this is where you start to find the leverage opportunities. So I'll put a yes on Emanuel Sanders, but track the news there. Cole Beasley, I'm personally not on. They can go to more 3 wide receiver sets. Beasley becomes a better play if Buffalo starts to trail by 10 to 14 points in this game, and they have to open it up with more 3 wide receiver sets. Otherwise, I think they stick to Dawson Knox in the slot. They stick to more 2 tight end sets. We start to get to the $4,000 and below range, which is where you might find some values down here. Definitely some guys in play, no doubt about it. And it starts with Zay Jones, who at this point has seen 7+ targets in 5 straight games in 6 of his last 7s. He's seeing elite usage, 89% of the snaps in week 18 and 8 targets in that game. His downfield usage has been very, very nice. I think that this is another player. We mentioned Jacoby Myers, who's more expensive than Tyler Boyd. Zay Jones is a player who is cheaper than Tyler Boyd, who gives you leverage off of him. Zay Jones is not going to be as owned as Tyler Boyd. Boyd will be 40% owned. Zay Jones 25 to 30% owned. Now, that being said, the way that Zay Jones wins mainly is downfield, and the way that the Bengals play defense is take away the deep shots. So the big play upside might not be there, but that doesn't mean a cheaper Zay Jones can't have a 5-catch, 60-yard, and a touchdown type performance. He doesn't have to have a 20 to 30+ yard touchdown. Like, it's going to probably neutralize the upside of a Bryan Edwards more and a Deshaun Jackson more, but at least Zay Jones is on the field in the red zone and seeing targets in the red zone. So Zay Jones is also in play, and the only reason I put a yes on Emanuel Sanders, by the way, is if you're playing Buffalo stacks, you really have to dig into the weeds as the week goes on and try and figure out who is going to be getting the most snaps between Emanuel Sanders and Gabe Davis. And there's a really good chance, and probably a probable chance, that the answer is we don't know until they go out there. I think that the second-year player with less experience, Emanuel Sanders, the veteran who has so much playoff experience, he has Super Bowl experience, I think that you're going to see Emanuel Sanders, at least I'm trying to build a narrative here, see more of those snaps, which makes him probably come in this game, in my opinion. Sanders, I have him at 12% ownership. If he's going to be 12% running, 30 routes for Buffalo in a playoff game on a 2-game slate, very appealing. The other side of that coin is Gabe Davis, who we just mentioned. Look, he ran 42 routes, 14 targets to close out the year 14 targets against the Jets. Look, he's been seeing starter snaps week 14, 15, 17, and 18 when Emanuel Sanders is not out there. He's running 43, 32, 27, and 42 routes in those games. But that's because Emanuel Sanders is not out there. I do think that changes. If you get news that they're going to say, no, we're sticking with Gabe Davis, well, then play Gabe Davis at $3,900 in your stacks. Otherwise, just proceed with caution. Emanuel Sanders on Tuesday, practice in full. It looks like he's expected back. The final 4 receivers here, I do think that Nelson Aguilar is appealing. Played a season high 93% of the snaps in his week 18 debut back from injury. It only led to 24 routes. It only led to 3 targets. He's going to see more downfield usage. The problem for Nelson Aguilar at $3,500 is that Buffalo is just known. Buffalo literally built their defense to play the Kansas City Chiefs. They built their defense on 2 very good safeties, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, right, the former Packer. Those 2 safeties limit the big plays. Well, how does Nelson Aguilar get there on the outside? He's basically just running go routes. Not basically, mainly the big plays for him. So that really caps the upside for a team that's not going to throw that much anyways. Isaiah McKenzie goes back to being wide receiver 5 in this game. And then Bryan Edwards and Deshaun Jackson, they're both going to be neutralized because of the way Cincinnati plays defense over top. Edwards at least saw his first 10-point game since week 10 last week. He's still on the field running 73% of the snaps. They're locked into the 2 wide receiver sets of Edwards and Zay Jones on the outside. When they go to 3 wide receiver sets, when they're not trying to run with 2 tight ends or play a double tight end set, you're going to see more Hunter Renfrow. So Bryan Edwards, if I had to choose between a cheap receiver, a receiver that's $4,000 or below, I'd probably choose Edwards. I'm not interested in Deshaun Jackson. He only played 8% of the snaps in a big week 18 game. Kind of shows you what they think about him. So for overall values, I think that Zay Jones, I think that Emanuel Sanders are the quality plays for GPPs below $5,000. I think they're both going to give you solid leverage. Like Emanuel Sanders this week is going to be 12% owned. And the more I talk about him, the more people are going to think I love this guy. If you're playing Buffalo stacks and you're looking for a leverage play and you want to take on that risk, that's the way to go. Emanuel Sanders is going to be 12% owned. Tyler Boyd is going to be more expensive and 40% owned. Emanuel Sanders is going to run the same amount of routes. Emanuel Sanders is going to see more downfield targets, and they probably both see 6 targets in this game. It then comes down to who scores the touchdown. Well, if You're telling me one guy's going to be 40% owned and one guy's going to be 12% owned. I'll just take the 12% owned guy and hope that he scores the touchdown, right? That's where you have to start playing GBPs. So let's close up this slate with the tight end position, which is pretty damn straightforward this week. I already mentioned that I have Darren Waller projected at this point for over 15 fantasy points. I have Darren Waller for about 6 more fantasy points than anybody else on the slate. I think that you really prioritize at $5,700 getting Darren Waller. Darren Waller should probably be $7,000 on the slate. Oh, but Sal, he only caught 2 balls for 22 yards in his debut. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm actually happy that I saw him go out there and run 37 routes, play his full-time role. He had 9 targets, 2 red zone targets on 78% of the snap. There was definitely some rust. There was definitely some wheels needing to be tuned up, and I think that's what we got in week 18. I'm not surprising anybody by saying that Darren Waller is the best tight end play in the slate and that I want him in my lineup. After that, it's kind of like, do you want to go double tight end, or if you build out a studded wide receiver approach with the top 2 receivers and one of the top quarterbacks and Joe Mixon, and it starts to get difficult to pay for Waller, although he is cheap, so I don't think it will. Then other tight ends you can consider on this slate. Next up, you have Dawson Knox, who's playing an elite 90% of the snaps lately. He's ran 30-plus routes in 4 of his last 5 games. The problem is he's not getting volume. He's only seen 14 targets in the last 4 games because they're running the ball more. There's just less volume to go around to the middle of the field type guys, and it's going to the outside guys or it's going to the running back. He remains in play, though, because he has 18 red zone targets in 14 games, but he's only, I don't know how, he is only $600 cheaper than Darren Waller. Darren Waller should be $7,200 on a slate like this if you're going to get Dawson Knox being priced at $5,100. And to close up the slate here, you have these only other 2 tight ends that make sense to me. Hunter Henry, it was nice to see him get a lot of volume last week. He has yet to top 85 air yards on the year, though, but he has the red zone upside. He scored double-digit touchdowns. Hunter Henry at $4,500 is in play. He's not that appealing. If you wanted to go to somebody else, and maybe you want to go double tight end to get frisky, CJ Uzomah would be that guy to me. He's ran 59 routes and seen 13 targets in these last 2 games when Cincinnati is throwing more. In the last 2 games, he has seen 4 red zone targets. Now, he hasn't topped 10 points since week 7, and the only 3 times he's topped 10 fantasy points this year, he's had to score a touchdown in those games. So you're probably playing a touchdown or bust situation at $3,500, and if you get him at $3,500, there's not that many cheap receivers in play below $4,000. We mentioned a couple of them. Nelson Aguilar doesn't look that great. Bryan Edwards doesn't look that great. So if you're going to play CJ Uzomah, let's say over one of those guys, basically the way you built your lineup out, there's a chance you can get the 3 for 30 in a touchdown game out of him at much lower ownership. Uzomah to probably come in around 20% owned, but the way if you build a 2 tight end approach lineup, that lineup total lineup ownership will be lower owned. Personally, not interested in Foster Moreau, and maybe one of the biggest busts this year in Jonnu Smith in terms of being a guy that was actually drafted as in like the 14th round and gave you absolutely no value at all. So that's where we're at on this 2-game slate. We'll have content for the 3-game slate tomorrow. We'll have content for the Monday slate. We'll be live streaming for those slates as well. So thank you for being here. Appreciate you all a ton. Be sure to take advantage of the offer. Promo code SAL gets you a free bet up to $100 on prizepicks.com. Go take those fantasy point overs for Waller and Jacoby Myers like we talked about. Hopefully, you're able to build a lovely lineup here, win the Dollar Rooskies, win the $1 million. Let me know on Twitter. Appreciate you all a ton. Before you go, hit the subscribe button, tell a friend to tell a friend about this channel, and I'll see you all in the next one.